Okay, so you've built yourself the edge sanding jig and now you need to know how to use it. Because most of the time when you get wood, it is not straight. You can see in this one, there's nearly a 1/4 of an inch gap in the middle of that. It touches at the top and at the bottom, but in the middle, huge gap. So we're going to use this edge sanding jig to make this a gluable piece. This piece of coal is also a perfect example of why I wouldn't want to use a jointer. This wood right in through here, all this different grain direction through here, when you run that through a jointer, it's very likely to pop some of that out and just create a big hole. So this is a much safer, much cheaper way to do this. We're going to start by just putting the jig into our universal jig holder. That's what this little board out here is for. We're just going to drop it into this slot. It's going to hold everything in place. We won't need any clamps on there to hold it down, and that'll prevent any kind of twisting in this board, so we'll get a nice clean joint. So step number one, put it on your bench. Now with our boards in place that we're going to sand, we need to get the tension right on this clamp. Right at the moment, it doesn't have nearly enough tension. I can lock it down and I can still slide the board around. So we simply adjust that. We simply adjust it with the nuts. I'm going to let that out a little bit so I can push this down and it'll create more tension. So let's try it there and see how good that is. Oh, that's a good snap. That'll hold it. Now I can adjust the second clamp. That's pretty good, but I'll give it just a wee bit more. Very good, that's good and firm. When you're loading your work pieces in, you don't want them to overhang too much. You need to have room for the sander. Right here it's going to run off the edge. So we want to push it back so that we have room for the sander. But we also don't want to have it so far back that you're sanding the jig rather than sanding the board. So what I like to do is just push my boards out about a 1/4 of an inch from this riser block on both sides, and that'll give me plenty of room on each end. Let me back up and show you one more thing. You want to get these pieces as flush as possible to each other before you clamp them down. That way you have less sanding to do. If you put them back like that, it'll still work, but you're going to be here all day. So just move this to where it feels nice and flush against your fingertips. Got a 1/4 inch out. Clamp it down. Come to the other side, feel that it feels flush here. Go ahead and clamp that side down, and we're ready to sand. Okay, we've already got everything built. So now, I've always found the best thing that works for me is pushing at kind of a 45-degree angle towards the piece and forward at the same time. So I have to kind of push in this kind of a motion. I'm finding that this one is just too big of a gap, so I'm going to speed up the process by roughly cutting a straight edge on one side. Okay, I straightened it out on the bandsaw and I took off just as little as possible. I would get this back in the mount, back in the jig here. That'll save us a lot of time. I've made this jig a few times before, so I have actually different grit sandpaper on this than this. This one's a little bit finer and it's taking a little bit long, so I'm going to use the one with the coarser sandpaper, get it close, and then I'll go back to that one. Now notice when I'm doing this, I'm keeping my hands between these clamps. You don't want to get out too far. It'll end up rounding over the edge. Same thing pulling back. If you get too far back here, it'll create a gap here and start rounding off this edge. Now it's very subtle, so you won't notice it until you get ready to candle it, and then you'll see gaps at the end. So if you just keep your hands between the clamps, you'll be fine. So short strokes. Okay, a few passes with our finer paper and we'll be finished here, I think. Okay, that feels good. Feels really nice and smooth. Okay, I know you think you're done, but stop. Do not take that thing out of the jig just yet. You have to do a double check. Let me show you the pencil test. Alright, the pencil test is quite simple. What you do is you take a pencil and you draw a line from one end of the board to the other and do that on both pieces. You see that? Hopefully you can see those lines. Then what you do is you come back and you sand some more, and once the lines disappear, you know you've got it pretty good. I usually repeat that and do the pencil test one more time just to make sure I've got everything good, but you could probably stop at the one test. Okay, that's perfect. Now we can see all the pencil is gone, so we're ready to go ahead and candle this thing. Alright, this is one of those things that I don't know if it's going to show up on camera well or not. I've tried to get the camera pointed towards this light bulb. I'm going to hold these pieces together, and I don't know if I've got them held together properly or not, but there shouldn't be any light in between those. Alright, so now you know how to use the jig. You know how to successfully put two straight edges on pieces of wood so you can glue them together and have a gap-free joint. And it was really cheap, really easy to make. One suggestion is, since these levels are so cheap, you might want to make a second one and use, say, 40 grit sandpaper on that, possibly 60. That's getting a little smooth in my opinion. But if you start with a 40, you can get those rough edges off real quick, and you won't need a bandsaw that way. Then you can finish it off with your 80 grit and you're ready to glue. So now that we've got this one done, we've got to move on to the next jig. So see you next time.